Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Maya. This is Jemi. Can you see her red hair? Yeah, can you say hi to the people? Hi to our friends. Oh no 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 no. Oh no 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 no. So, I wanted to do my labor and delivery story for you guys. She was born February 11th. She is exactly 6 weeks old today. Oh, now she's asleep. Well, look at that. I got induced for a couple of reasons. One, I lived about 2.5 hours away from the hospital where I was going to have her. And we had some nasty weather in February, so I was worried about going into labor and getting into bad roads, sliding into the ditch, getting stuck in the snow. I had lots of different alternatives that I was afraid of might happen, so I chose to get induced. And my doctor said I was already far enough along, far enough dilated where it would be fine if I was induced. I was just about 2 centimeters, so she said, yeah, it's fine. So I went in February 10th, Sunday night at 8 p.m. and we talked about all the different options, and by this point I was already 3 centimeters dilated. So they decided just to start me on Pitocin, and by the time I got all checked in, IV, they let me have some food, one last dinner, because once I was on Pitocin they said I couldn't have any solids. So I had a fruit platter, just a bunch of fruit and all that good stuff. It's trying to be healthy, you know. So by the time they finally started me on Pitocin, it was 11 p.m. And I was, good to go, cracking jokes, and they started me on Pitocin, and I was prepping myself because, oh, and if you don't know, this is my second baby. With my first child, when I had Pitocin, it hit me like a cement wall. I don't even know if that's the saying. But I got hit, holy crap, within 10 minutes of getting Pitocin with my first son. I was in misery. So I was preparing myself with this one, with Jemi, when I got Pitocin. I had mentally prepared myself for the pain that was going to hit me any second. And it never came. And I kept waiting and waiting, and every half an hour the nurse would come in and up my Pitocin, and every time she came in, I was like, I'm not feeling anything yet. She's like, well, you're having contractions, and they're getting closer and closer together, and pretty soon they were 2 minutes apart, and I was like, I still can't feel anything, it's not working, nothing's happening. And still they hadn't checked me yet. They just kept upping the Pitocin, upping it. And the night just kept going on like this. I had to get up every half an hour to pee with all the belly bands on my belly, taking the heartbeat monitors and all that stuff. But anyways, so by about 5 a.m. I'd gone all that time. I still couldn't feel contractions. I could feel like a slight tightening of my stomach. If I concentrated, I could barely feel that. But otherwise, I wasn't feeling any real contractions that I had felt with my son. So at 5 a.m. they came in. By this point, the Pitocin was at the strongest level that they were allowed to give me. And I was just starting to feel stronger contractions. Still barely there, but a little bit more than just a tightening. And it was super easy to handle. They came in, the nurse came in, and she's like, okay, I'm going to have the doctor check you since you're at the strongest level of Pitocin that we can give you. So the doctor came in at 5:30, and by this point I could feel the contractions. Still, I could talk through them, I could breathe through them, still not bad, but I was surprised how quickly they were. I shouldn't say I'm surprised, because I was expecting it for my son, but I noticed things were definitely starting to progress very quickly. And I decided, they're still super easy, but I want to get ready for the epidural just as an option. And I knew that they had to give you a bunch of fluid before he got the epidural said, like, why don't you just start the epidural, and when it's, or excuse me, why don't you just start the fluid, and when it's done, if I want the epidural, it's an option. If not, then I will just be well hydrated. So the doctor checked me. I was 5 centimeters. So I was surprised. I was happy that I had progressed, but at the same time, a little disappointed that I'd only gone up 2 centimeters. But yeah, so they started me on the fluid, and within 5 minutes of leaving, oh my gosh, things got intense. So my husband was just there trying to help me breathe through them, and I was just doing my best to just work through them. And luckily the fluid went through the IV very quickly. The nurse was surprised. She's like, wow, this is going through a lot faster than I thought, so you can get the epidural sooner rather than later, which made me happy. By 6 a.m., the anesthesiologist came in and started prepping the epidural and stuff. At this point, I was honestly worried I would not be able to sit still as he gave me the epidural, just because the contractions were so painful. And as I was sitting up to kind of get ready for the epidural, we had realized that my water had broke, which was probably why the contractions intensified so quickly, is because my water had broken. So I finally got the epidural, and at this point, I don't even know what time it was. And immediately I recognized the feeling of my legs got kind of warm, a little tingly. I lay back on the bed and just kind of kept working through the contractions, wondering when the rest of the epidural would kick in. All I got was kind of warm, tingly legs, and nothing else happened. And at this point, I kind of remember the same thing happening with Josiah, my first. And I was hoping I wouldn't have the same experience the second time, but I did. So for some reason, the epidural barely made my legs a little numb, just pretty much warm and tingly. And then it stopped, and the contractions kept coming closer and closer, more intense, and I didn't realize it, but I was on the transition stage at this point, so pretty intense, and I could still feel everything. And at this point, the screaming came. So they kept calling the anesthesiologist back in, and I was kind of in broken English at this point. I couldn't quite communicate real well anymore. I told my awesome nurse, she was incredible, oh my gosh, I couldn't have done this without her, that this had happened before. So the anesthesiologist kept adding, there's a catheter in your back when you get a epidural. He kept adding stuff to the IV catheter in my back. And because I was in the transition stage, it's natural for the baby to get a little stressed out, so they were a little worried about that. I was just showing some stress on her, which is natural, the doctor told me later, but no one knew I was in transition stage because, you know, half an hour ago I was only at 5 centimeters. At this point, they had me on my side with the peanut ball in between my legs. I hate that thing. Oh my gosh, hate it. And then I started getting really bad back contractions, so I had a nurse use like her fist and was rubbing my back out. And I kept saying, harder, harder, rub harder, and it was the only relief I had. So thank you, nurse. And yeah, like I said, lost track of time. This went on for a while. And all of a sudden I felt pressure, like I had to push. I was like, there's a ton of pressure. Okay, I didn't say it. I screamed it. I feel pressure. And the anesthesiologist is still there with me. And at this point, he's like, okay, this is the last thing. This is our last option. Otherwise, if this doesn't work, then he's like, I'm sorry. Which is not what I wanted to hear. And the nurse checked me. She's like, yeah, she's complete. Call the doctor. At this point, it wasn't even 7 a.m. yet. It was 6:50, I think. So not even 2 hours, just over an hour and a half from the last time they checked me when I was only at a 5. So I went 5 to a 10 centimeter in just over an hour and a half. I'm pretty impressed with myself. And within 5 minutes, the epidural was working. So I was able to kind of relax a little bit. I could still feel the contractions, which is, I'm glad I could because it helped me push. But I had relief. It was so much better, so much better. So people were just waiting for the doctor. And the rows were kind of bad, so it took a while. And they were just setting everything up, all the baby nurses, I'm not sure all the terms, but all of a sudden there was 15 people in the room, and I was just pretty sure I fell asleep in between contractions. I was just so tired. And finally my doctor got here, and I think it was probably honestly half an hour later, and she got here. And they prepped me, and they're like, I know you've had a baby before, but just a reminder, when you feel the contractions, bear down, push like you're pooping, all that jazz. And for those of you who don't know, and I'll link it below, my labor and delivery story with my son, he was a 39-hour labor and delivery. And I pushed for 6 hours with him. So everyone knew this. They're like, okay, we're going to get this baby out in 45 minutes or less. I'm like, okay, let's do this. So I started to do my first push, and they're like, whoa, stop, 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 stop. I'm like, what? They're like, the head's out. I'm like, what? That was like half a push, and her head's already out. And they're like, okay, just do some slight slow pushes. And I did like another half push. They're like, okay, stop. And I feel like they were checking for a cord, not quite sure what they did. They're like, okay, do another small push. I did another half a push, and she was born just like that. So that made me really happy. I didn't have to push for 2 hours. It was like, what, like 3 half pushes, so 1.5 pushes to get her out. So that made me really happy, and she was born, and she was 7 pounds 11 ounces. She weighed exactly she weighed 7 pounds 11 ounces, and she was exactly 18 inches long, and she had this really pretty, unique golden hair. No one had ever seen hair like that. It wasn't blonde, it wasn't red, it was just a golden orange color almost. And the older she gets, the more red it turns. I had red hair when I was born, and it turned blonde. So I'm curious to see if she stays a redhead or if she turns blonde. And there's other people, like my grandma was a redhead, and then some people on my husband's side of the family, they have redheads in that family area. So I'm curious to see if it stays red or if it turns a color. So yeah, that's just kind of it. And been getting used to 0 hours of sleep again. Yeah, if Jemi's not awake, then it's my son. He's 19 months old and teething. So if Jemi's not awake, then Josiah's awake. If Josiah's sleeping, then Jemi's awake. So fun stuff. But yeah, just thanks for tuning in. Thank you if you've made it this far. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.